Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody, Hands-On Apologetics. I am Gary Michuta. Welcome and to the dojo, as we call it here. This is Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. And I'm Gary Michuta. I am so pleased to be with you today to chat about how to explain, defend the faith, love the faith. And we do have a good show in store for you. In fact, Beth in the chat room made my day. She said it's going to be another great show for the books. I appreciate that, Beth. We have a great show in store for you because Dr. Paul Thigpen is coming into the dojo. He's going to be sharing his journey to the Catholic faith. And Dr. Paul has an amazing story, if you're not familiar with it, because his detour, it isn't your typical grew up nominal Protestant, became Catholic story, but actually he kind of took a detour into the occult. And for that reason, Dr. Paul not only is very sharp in terms of theology, philosophy, but he also knows spiritual warfare and the dark side. So it's going to be a really cool journey to the faith story for today's show. Also, as always, we are going to sharpen our critical thinking skills with our Finding the Fallacy, and also going to meet an early church father. Just learn about all those great Christian writers that have written before the 7th century, 8th century, that formed our faith and are responsible. And many times we covered the greats like Augustine and Jerome. Sometimes we cover people that you might not be familiar with. And today's Meet the Early Church Father, I think, will fall into that latter category. It's going to be Saint Germain I of Constantinople. So that's our Meet the Early Church Father for today. And also, you are part of the program, so if you'd like to ask a question, you can give us a call at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. Love to hear from you, especially when Dr. Paul comes on the air. If you have questions or ideas and stuff, we'd love to hear it. Also, you can send us your emails at questions@handsonapologetics.com. That is questions@handsonapologetics, all one word.com. That goes straight to the dojo mailbox where I read it and reply. And sometimes I even bring it on the air. And we have a couple on hold. And if anybody has emailed me and I mentioned that I'll share it on the air, thank you for your patience. Eventually we'll get to there. We've had so many great guests booked that I really haven't had time to go to the mailbox. And anyway, and I should also give my shout-outs. Yes, hello, everybody watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. It's great to be with you, and thank you so much for the emoji explosion. Yes, in that corner of the dojo, the social media. So if you're a Facebook fan or a YouTube fan, you can always actually watch the program live on Facebook or YouTube. So check it out. There's a really cool chat room with lots of great people. So yes, I am doing a shout out and a hat tip to you guys on YouTube, which I try to follow during the show, but of course I can't follow everything. So let's see. I did the mailbox. I did. What I didn't do was mention that you can also listen to Virgin Most Powerful on the Virgin Most Powerful phone app. If you haven't downloaded it, check it out. Download it. And you can not only access our shows live, but you can also access them through podcast. There's also lots of great material that's available through the phone app. And I know we get a lot of listeners through that. And also we get a lot of people listening to podcasts at the Virgin Most Powerful's flagship website, virginmostpowerfulradio.org. All right. So I did all the housekeeping. I think I'm all set. So why don't we jump into our exercises, shall we? Let's start with finding a fallacy. And like I said, today's finding the fallacy. Actually, I didn't say it, but today's finding the fallacy is called a loaded label. The loaded label. And what is this? Well, it's when an arguer tries to influence an audience by creating a label that supports their arguments. Now, what do I mean by that? Essentially, what they try to do is to take a term or a phrase and load it with either positive or negative content or conclusions. And so the audience will operate on the basis of their statement. Let me give you an example. I got this from Google. I'm not sure exactly where. Chances are it's Wikipedia, but nevertheless, actually the Wikipedia stuff isn't too bad when it comes to finding the fallacy. Their example is this. Organic foods are safe and healthy foods grown without pesticides, herbicides, or other unhealthy additives. Now, the reason why this is a loaded label is because if you're making an argument and you make a statement like that, what you're doing is you're pre-packaging the word, in this case it would be organic foods, and defining for the audience whether or not it's good, right? And then you could use that pre-packaged meaning to argue for your case. But the problem is, of course, that you haven't argued or really demonstrated anything as to why organic foods are safe or healthy, or whether you're correct or incorrect. It's just basically you have labeled it healthy and safe. Okay, now that might be true, but when it comes to arguing, you can't like pre-label things. You can't kind of give the conclusions and sneak them in under certain terms and then use those to argue for the conclusion. So, okay, so a little bit tricky finding a fallacy for today, but it's certainly out there, folks, and it's certainly used in political rhetoric. It's sometimes used in apologetics, so beware. You know, whenever somebody is making a statement and they'll just start defining things for you and building conclusions on the stuff they defined, they're kind of using the loaded label fallacy. All right, very good. Let's talk about the Meet the Early Church Father for today. Like I said, he's not very well known, but it's Saint Germain I of Constantinople, born sometime around AD 634, died 733. Germain, although it's sometimes spelled German, is the first of that name to be named Patriarch of Constantinople. He was born there, as I said, around 634. His father was a nobleman named Justinian, and he was a confidant of the Emperor Heraclius, who reigned from 610 to 641. Justinian gradually lost favor, however, with later emperors, and until about 668 he was charged with treasonable conspiracy and executed. Germain was castrated and obliged to join the clergy at the Church of the Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom. And interesting enough, you would think, boy, what a terrible way to start off life. You have your father executed, and you get castrated and forced to join the clergy. But actually, it's there that his fortunes change and his influence increases. And so much so that he actually persuades the emperor, Constantine IV, to convoke the Third Council, which is the Sixth Ecumenical Council of Constantinople, which condemned the heresy known as monothelism, and this took place in 681. What's monothelism? Well, monothelism is the heresy that they believed that there was only one will in Christ. Okay, Christ didn't have two wills, but he had one will. And this is a very subtle heresy because it wasn't exactly clear among the Orthodox, because when you say one will, what do you mean by one will? Do you mean that he didn't have a true human will? Or do you mean that his human will was in perfect union with his divine will? And so the Monothelites believed he only had the divine will, and he didn't have human will, which is important because that means Jesus wasn't fully man, because as part of our nature, we have will. Okay. So, about the year 706, Germain was made archbishop, and under the pressure of the emperor in 712 at a synod of Constantinople, Germain was weak enough to subscribe to a monothelism that he earlier fought against. However, very quickly afterwards, he reasserted his faith that Christ has two natures and two wills. And on August 715, he was made Patriarch of Constantinople by the Orthodox Emperor Anastasius II. Germain immediately convoked the Synod of Constantinople in 715 and reissued his formal condemnation of the heresy of monothelism. Now, other good stuff about this particular early church father, he was an ardent opponent of iconoclasm, this belief that images are not to be used in religious use or worship. So he opposed iconoclasm. So he was for images, and unfortunately he did so, or fortunately I guess you could say, during the reign of the Emperor Leo III the Assyrian, who, by the way, had lots of inclinations towards Islam, and that was really part of the moving force behind iconoclasm, because Islam, of course, doesn't allow images, and so it was thought that, well, if Christians can get rid of these images, then that Islam would buddy up to us, which of course didn't happen. So he was deposed by the Emperor Leo III, where he retired to his parental state outside of Constantinople, where he died at 733 AD, about the age of 98, ladies and gentlemen. So that's Saint Germain I of Constantinople, and a very fascinating life, I think, because it shows that right when you think things are the darkest, if you remain faithful to God, things will turn around, and you could be a great warrior for our Lord. And that's something I think every Catholic apologist should keep in mind. Coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to be talking with Dr. Paul Thigpen, and he's going to share with us his story of coming from the cult to the Catholic Church. So don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. You listen to Hands On Apologetics. I'm Gary Machuda. Be right back.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. You know, there's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands on Apologetics. And the journeys to the faith. It's amazing how many different ways people find, by God's grace, their way into the Catholic Church. Some journeys are short, some are long, some are intellectually based, some are spiritually based. And so I always love listening to people's journeys of the faith, because you learn so much from viewing the church from the outside. And to help us walk through his own journey of faith, we have Dr. Paul Thigpen. Dr. Thigpen earned a BA in Religious Studies from Yale University, an MA and PhD in Historical Theology at Emory University. He's the best-selling author and award-winning journalist. Dr. Thigpen has published over 35 books and more than 500 journal articles, magazine articles, or more in religious and secular periodicals, both scholarly and popular. And welcome to Hands on Apologetics, Dr. Thigpen.
Be here, brother.
Yeah, it's great to finally make your acquaintance. I've been familiar with your work for years, but I'm so glad that you're able to come on the show.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess the best thing to do is start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about where you began. What was were you in a religious home when you grew up?
Oh, we were Presbyterian. Although I guess when I was born, we were attending a Lutheran church. I don't think my parents ever felt a strong association with any particular denomination. And we were largely church-going. At the age of 12, though, I became an atheist. Kind of an odd thing for a 12-year-old to do, I guess. But I had a teacher at school history teacher, I think, who had put into my hands some books by Voltaire and other French Enlightenment skeptics from the 18th century. And I think probably it was a part of my adolescent rebellion at that point that I didn't think of it in those terms, but by kind of rebelling against my parents' faith, I was rebelling against them. So for 6 years, I was an atheist from the time I was 12 till I was 18, my senior of high school, right at the end.
Wow. So at 12 years old, you're reading Voltaire. That's very impressive.
Well, yeah, the teacher put that in my hands, and I found it fascinating. A lot of other stuff, too. It's really into science and other kinds of things. So it was, of course, those were the days before the internet, but a lot of things even then out there that, young men could read that could be to sow doubts in his mind. And
sure.
That's what happened to him. So the interesting thing, though, is that I still had a longing for what you could call the transcendent, longing for something beyond everyday life. And I could no longer believe, or thought I couldn't believe in God or in life after death or in angels or demons or spirits or anything like that. Thought that everything was either matter or energy, and yet I began thinking, what can I go beyond that kind of every day? And I discovered what then was called parapsychology. Today we might talk about paranormal phenomena. Thinking, okay, stuff like people who seem to be able to predict the future or read minds or mind over matter, that's something beyond the everyday. I'll bet it's just a part of the natural world, some power of the brain that we haven't discovered yet. So wouldn't it be interesting to kind of study that and to see if we could find out more about it? So I could kind of have what seemed transcendent without giving up my, self-proclaimed scientific atheism. And so for my 7th grade science project, I sent off to what was in the Duke University of Parapsychology, Institute of Parapsychology, and got their testing materials for parapsychological phenomena, especially to see if people could read things that, or know things that they couldn't get by their senses, or that they could make dice fall the way they want them to. Very simple kind of experiments. And
okay,
that
like
was
ESP,
my 7th grade science
that type
project.
of stuff?
Yeah, ESP and PK, psychokinesis, which is mind over matter kind of things. Mm-hmm. And had a very successful set of experiments with that. I think I got a blue ribbon, as I recall. And that just kind of launched me in that direction.
Wow. So what was your findings? I'm just curious. Did you think there was a connection there? This is a real phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, the way they have it set up is you have these tests, kind of carefully controlled tests, and if you get a certain score high enough, that's pretty high for being able to identify symbols on a card that you're not actually looking at, to be able to make dice fall a certain number of times. That if it's high enough, it's well beyond what would be considered, the score you would get by random, a random score, a chance. And so they would consider that evidence that something else is going on. And that happened with me a lot. And so from there, it was kind of a simple step to say, okay, what other kinds of things might be like this? Maybe it's just a part of the mind we haven't discovered yet. So it was a short step for me to get into Ouija boards, to get into seances, that kind of thing. I discounted the whole time that there's anything spiritual about that we were dealing with spirits or deceased spirits or demons or anything else. I just thought, no, this is all powers of the mind. I'm just trying to, in my own little way, add to our scientific knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're approaching it strictly from a materialistic, naturalistic viewpoint, but you're still open to the possibility that perhaps there are horizons of knowledge that still need to be discovered that doesn't fit neatly into that worldview.
Yeah, well, I was open, I guess. We kind of think like, okay, for how many generations was electricity not understood or even realized that it existed, and people would think lightning was one thing when it's really another. So kind of using that in my own mind as a paradigm. What are the horizons of science that we can press on? And again, I was just a teenager at this point, so it's not like I can do much to open those horizons. But what it did is allowed me to have a sense of being involved in something transcendent without having to deny my new, very tidy worldview, which was that there's nothing beyond matter and energy. But of course, that wasn't going to last long. Because the kind of things I was getting involved with are just open doors to the spiritual world.
Yeah, so you weren't out to make contact with demons or ghosts or things like that per se. It was more of a venture in, okay, well, let's explore this part of physical reality. So I take it that you started getting feedback from the other side when you start doing this.
Yes. Well, several things happened. That was kind of one direction. I started getting feedback from the other side. Other things were going on. I, as a part of this kind of 18th century Enlightenment view that I had adopted as a kid, I had this notion that humankind was perfectible, that we could, if we just had the right education and formation, we could create kind of a, like something like the kingdom of God on earth, but without God, of course. And I was in the middle of them once I got to my high school years. They were setting us, born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, and there had been kind of a forced segregation, racial segregation in the schools, even though there had been a decision by the Supreme Court against that would rule the day before I was born. So here we are 18 years later, and my senior year of high school. We had my sophomore year, I went to a school that was all African American until I went there, and my friends who were white. But we had found that together we were building a very harmonious biracial community. Things were going beautifully, and then my senior year of high school, they shook up all the student demographics again. Ended up being some very different people there who were not nearly so encouraged about being harmonious. Some people were very racist, both black and white. Ended up with rioting and other things, so that it just smashed this idol I had of a perfectible humanity. So that was another thing that had to happen, that God had to arrange during this time before I could. I had to kind of lose this false confidence in a perfectible humanity before I needed to have that happen before I could come to the realization that we desperately needed a Savior. Yeah. So that's part of what was happening. The other thing that I began to get this pushback from the spiritual world, as I realized there had some incidents that convinced me that these things I thought were powers of my mind that I was still trying to discover were actually not my powers at all. I could not control them, and they were out to eat like my lunch. They weren't. It wasn't like Casper for the Ghost. It was something really terrible out to kill me. And when that happened, I mean, there's several incidents I can talk about, but when that happened, one night I nearly died, or at least felt that I was threatened that way. After all that, I thought, okay, I remember stories of something like this happening in the Gospels that I learned as a kid. Maybe I need to go back and read this book. Because if there's a devil and there's no God, I'm really in trouble.
Yeah. So, let's see. We have about 2 minutes. Can you share like one instance of where that happened?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of complicated, but one night I was with some friends, and basically very dark spirit took over my body, took control of it, and spoke in my mind saying, I'm going to throw you in the water. We lived on the water, had a dock, and I can't swim. So I knew that meant it was going to kill me. Superhuman strength flowing through my body. It took two of my friends who were with me late that night to just hold me down to keep it from it. I heard another voice in my mind say, focus on the cross. And I realized I had a silver cross around my neck that my girlfriend had given me. It didn't mean anything to me except it was from her. Started focusing on it. The thing began to dissipate, and then found out later that one of the guys I was with that I hadn't met until then had a girlfriend who went through the same thing, and that she was practicing witch. So all these things kind of began to come together, and I thought, okay, there's something there that does not fit into my tidy little materialistic worldview. And it's one of the things that got me looking, as well as some experiments I made in prayer. Or one case where a riot was stopped after I prayed. It was amazing, in a very amazing way.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I want to hear about that, but since we're coming up to our first break, I don't want you to start and then get interrupted. So it's amazing how, even though you gave up God at the age of 12 and was in this lifestyle, that you automatically had recourse to God, to prayer, to the cross when the need came up.
Well, I was still surrounded by Christians. Some of the adults that I was closest to were all very devout, radiant Christians, some Christian friends. And so that's part of what was going on, that I had that kind of in mind all the time because of their example.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, yeah, I'm familiar with the story of the near riot, so I want you to share that on the other side of the break. We're talking with Dr. Paul Thigpen, and about his journey to the faith, I guess you could say, from occultism to the church. Great stuff. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back right after this.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. You know, there's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Dr. Paul Thigpen about his journey into the faith. And right before the break, for those who are just tuning in, he was sharing how he, as a young age, gave up his belief in God. He started dabbling in the occult more as just experimenting to see if there's some sort of a paranormal, phenomenon that is linked to nature. And then he started getting pushback from the dark side. And right before the break, you were going to tell us your story about, I guess you could say, pushback from the other side. Your prayer to God that was miraculously answered.
Well, it's pretty amazing. It's one of what I would now call kind of an experiment in prayer. Some of the other things I mentioned had already happened, and so I guess I was more open to this possibility. And we had the rioting that I mentioned before in my high school that had just devastated me because I had put all my faith in humankind as perfectible, and had seen my high school as kind of a laboratory for working that out, and things had gone so well. We had built a beautiful biracial community of harmony. And then this one day when the rioting started, it all came crashing down. So it's not long after that where I was walking with a Christian friend between classes on the high school campus, and came around a corner and saw in a big grassy area a mob forming. And on one side were white students and the other African-American students. They had a gap between them. They were facing off. They were furious, fists clenched, faces twisted in rage. Some of them had things that they could hurt each other with in their hands. It was the day before metal detectors for high schools. Yeah. And cursing and shouting. And I'd seen this happen, before. I knew, okay, this riot's about to start. And at this point, you think there's no way to go back. They're just, they're too far gone. They're about to jump on each other. And the friend who was with me said, I don't know about you, but I'm going to pray. And we're some distance away, so it's not like we're right there and people are watching us. They don't know we're praying. And they were too preoccupied anyway. So she drops to her knees on the sidewalk and starts to pray. And I had a dilemma. I at that point, I still didn't believe in God or that prayer could do anything. And yet I really loved my friends. I had friends out there in that crowd on both sides, and I didn't want to see them hurt each other. And so I felt, okay, if, I don't know if there's a God or not, but if there's any chance that prayer could help this, I've got to do it for their sake. I've just got to humble myself and do it. Mm-hmm. So I dropped to my knees and said, a very simple prayer. I said, God, if there is a God, this can't possibly be your will. Please do something about it. Please stop it. And, stood back up again and watched. And right after that, it was the most amazing thing. What began to happen is on one side, somebody began to laugh, a big belly laugh, just a really contagious belly laugh out of nowhere. Who knows what they laughed about? And then the people around him started laughing. And then it eventually jumped over the gap to the other side of the mob, and they started laughing. And before you knew it, both mobs and both parts of the mob were just laughing uproariously. And you could see the tension, the anger, the fury just drain out of their faces and their limbs. And they ended up kind of shrugging their shoulders and they walked off. No riot.
Wow.
Now the thing is, I've often said to people, if it had happened that right at that moment after I prayed, a SWAT team. I don't think they even had them then, maybe, but a SWAT team, the helicopter kind of descended right between the two groups, and police came out and they stopped the riot from happening. That would have still been an answer to prayer, but it would have been a lot easier for me later on to argue that it was just coincidence. Just somebody called the police, so that happened to be the moment they came in to try to write it off. But what do you do with that? What really happened? I mean, it's so unbelievable that if I were to put it in a novel, somebody would say, this is not believable enough to go in a
right.
fiction. It's stranger than fiction. And there it was. How do you it just, all I could do was think about it for a long time, R.D.
Yeah.
How did that happen? That really seems to be an answer to my prayer that came from beyond anything that this earth would have to offer.
Yeah. Yeah, and so completely, too, because if the police intervened, there'd still be violence, There'd still be confrontation, but just miraculously bursting out into laughter. You're right. That would be square peg, round hole moment right there.
So it was, that was pretty amazing to me. Other kind of answers to prayer. I finally, at the end of my senior year, the Campus Crusade for Christ, a lot of our listeners have probably heard of them, was having a huge youth rally, unlike any it has ever held in Dallas. I'm in Savannah, so I'm halfway across the country. But and the final speaker was going to be Billy Graham, and they were going to have a big rock concert, Christian music, and my closest male friend, who was an adult, said, "Hey, I'm one of the chaperones, and my son's coming, who's one of my good friends. I want you to come with us, and I'll pay for it. All you got to do is pack up and get on the bus." And so just a few days after graduation, I went. And all I can say, a lot of that is still kind of foggy to me that week, but all I can say is that by the time the week was over, I knew that I believed, that all the other things that had been happening to me in the previous months, there was a cumulative effect there until I finally could no longer say that's all coincidence or that's something else. There is a God, and I do believe the gospel. So it was a powerful conversion experience for me, and none too soon, because I guess it was never too soon, but because I was getting ready to go off to college where I was going to have my faith challenged.
Yeah, I bet. So you did you join an evangelical church, or was this just a personal conversion?
Well, for the few weeks remaining in the summer, a couple of months remaining this summer, I was going to my Presbyterian church and very on fire there. And people were wondering what's happened to this guy. But when I went off to college, I was at Yale, and the Yale Christian Fellowship, as it's called, it's an InterVarsity chapter. I fell in with them right away, and just wonderful folks, deep faith, really intelligent, really bright people who could help me with any struggles I might, have remaining. So that became really my new faith community. It was like a church to me. I also would visit churches off campus, but was only there a semester. At first, I won't go into the details, but one day during one of those IVF meetings, I heard the Lord saying to me really clearly, "I want you to drop out of college, drop out of Yale." And that was a difficult thing. I had wanted to go to Yale ever since I was in junior high. Somehow I just got in my head that's where I wanted to be, and I realized now looking back it was an idol in my life. But the Lord convinced me through a whole series of amazing things that would be hard to chalk up to coincidence. And so at the end of the first semester I left, ended up then again by His direction going off to Europe and becoming the lead singer in a Christian rock band. Evangelical for Assemblies of God was the background. It was a group called Teen Challenge, worked mostly with street people and drug rehab. So we were based in Germany, but traveled in, I don't know, probably a dozen countries or more while I was there. And during the time, we'd be singing in the evening, pardon me, but during the day I was being really careful to start reading apologetic works for Christianity in general, a lot of C.S. Lewis and some other folks. So my faith was being strengthened. And then after, it was 18 months, a little more, the Lord said, "Okay, come back, once you're back in school." So I went back and majored in religious studies. Had all kinds of challenges from professors who taught religion but didn't believe any of it. But the Lord brought me through that.
Now, was that your original plan to go to Yale and enter religious studies, or did you have a different path in mind?
No. Actually, I was before my conversion. I was planning to do poli-sci or even law, and then I really wanted to go into politics. I was a very ambitious young man. I wanted public office and all kinds of things. I look back now, and I can think of at least one president who was close to my age that I might have been a lot like, and I'm so glad I didn't turn out that way. Not even as president, but just someone who kind of did everything to get people to like him. And I guess
so. You were saved in more ways than one. I mean, you could have been a lawyer and a politician.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, but I did. I mean, the only time I wavered, once I became a Christian, it was just so clear to me that I wanted to spend my time in college. If I could, focus on one thing, it would be on God and learning about Him. I had one little lapse for a summer where I had taken an introductory course in linguistics because I've always loved languages and was so fascinated by it and got to know about the Wycliffe Bible translators who do this amazing work of helping remote tribes who don't even have a written language to develop a written language for them so that you can then make a written Bible for them, a printed Bible. And so for a summer, I convinced myself that's what I needed to do. But to do that, I would have to major in linguistics. But that only lasted for summer, and then I knew it's back to religious studies. Okay,
yeah. So you returned to Yale, and at least you were fortified with the apologetics that you learned in Europe. That when you're going into these comparative religions and studies of religions, you can kind of tell where the professor was, right? So that kind of armed you.
Oh, it did. And especially I did take some comparative religion, but the worst, the most threatening thing were professors who would teach New Testament or Old Testament and believe it was all, legend or that kind of thing. I saw during those 2 years in Europe, saw some amazing things, some more things that had to do with demonic powers. I was present for a couple of Pentecostal exorcisms. I actually saw what I believe, thoroughly to have been miraculous, some miracles. And so when I would come back, I still remember sitting in a New Testament course with a professor who didn't believe any of it, and he gets to a story about a demon being cast out, and then says something, kind of chuckles and says, "But of course we know this is legend because such things don't exist." And I just kind of sat back in my chair. I didn't want to argue with him in class. It was a big lecture style class, but I just thought, in my typical Southern way, "Bubba, you got to me too late. You think too much. I know things you don't know."
That's right. Well, hey, I hear the music coming up, so we're coming up on another break. We're chatting with Dr. Paul Thigpen about his journey from, I guess you could say, from occultism to the Catholic Church. Great stuff. More to come on the other side of the break, so stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Dr. Paul Thigpen about his journey to the faith, from occultism to Christianity, eventually to the Catholic Church. And he was just sharing on the other side of the break how he came back to Yale, entered into religious studies, and some of the anti-supernaturalistic interpretations of Scripture that he ran into as far as his professors. And, Paul, while the break, I was thinking I just finished a 2-volume work by an evangelical named Craig Keener on miracles. And he marshals a lot of information, especially from Pentecostals, missionary works about miracles being performed today. And I was thinking, wow, Dr. Thigpen was like way before your time, because essentially you had this knowledge, going into these classes on New Testament, Old Testament studies where the professors didn't believe miracles were possible.
Well, I was in a Pentecostal setting in Europe, and it was pretty amazing. Some of the things we saw, the kind of things that you could never forget, that you think about later and say, okay, maybe it could have been that, could have been that. Instead, you look for alternative explanations, and there just don't seem to be any. So it did wonderful things for my faith, especially because in that setting, some of the professors and stuff were. The one particular professor I won't name, who I asked him one time. We were talking privately in his office, and I said, it's clear to me from some things you said that you're not a Christian, not a believer. Why would you give yourself to a career of teaching about these things if you don't believe in any of it? Yeah. And he looked at me with this very stern look. I mean, not mean look, but just very serious look. And he says, Paul, I went to seminary, and some young men, when they go off to seminary, they see the light. But I went off to seminary, I saw the darkness, and I've been trying to convince people of it ever since. Wow. I wasn't Catholic, but I wanted to make the sign of the cross. It sounded so creepy.
Wow.
And so you ran into that a lot with people really seeing it as their life mission to relieve all these young, they saw as naive students of their faith, and to make them hardened skeptics like themselves. So I can remember sometimes when I actually got to the point where I realized this is a spiritual battle that's going on. It's not just a battle in my mind. But I could go back to those things and say, no, I saw this. It's real. They don't know what they're talking about. It's who is it? Was it John Stuart Mill? Somebody once said that men are more likely to be correct in the things they affirm than in the things they deny. Men are more likely to be correct in the things they affirm than in the things they deny, because they tend to affirm what they've experienced. They tend to deny what they haven't experienced. And just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean that it's not there. It doesn't exist. Right. And so that was part of it's part of where I was coming from. I knew an old Bible teacher in the Pentecostal tradition who used to say, a man with a theory, or a man with a man with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with just a theory. And that was the case for me. The professor could stay up there all day long and try to convince me that miracles didn't happen, that food didn't multiply, that demons didn't exist, that that people didn't get suddenly healed by the power of God. But that was just his theory coming out of a denial that came out of his own failure to experience any of those things. Yeah. Whereas for me, I had the experience of it. And all I can say is, I'm sorry, you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't that where Humean, David Hume's argument against miracles is basically we don't really experience them, so there's good reason to doubt that they'd ever exist.
Yeah. And of course, Lewis's book on miracles, a preliminary study, C.S. Lewis, demolishes all that. Yeah. His teaching, and as a powerful, very powerful study of the whole thing from that point of view. But again, someone who's experienced them, you're not going to convince them it doesn't happen, of course.
Yeah, that's true. So you were still Pentecostal. When did you begin to think maybe Catholicism is the place to go?
Well, I had, had Catholic friends growing up, and had met with a priest even when I was still in the fifth grade. My girlfriend's priest, wanted to talk to him about the Catholic faith, but just out of curiosity, I guess. But I had a good close encounter my senior year of college. I decided to write I'd begun to get interested in the Catholic faith, but being a Pentecostal, was interested in charismatic Catholics. Kind of seeing that as a convergence, or at least an overlapping of some things that I was already familiar with. So my senior essay was a study of a Catholic charismatic covenant community in Rhode Island, Providence, Rhode Island, and went to live with them actually for a few weeks to write the paper, the senior thesis, and met some wonderful people, saw some wonderful things going on. It relieved me a lot of the misunderstandings I had of the Catholic faith. They even invited me to stay and teach in a school they had, but I wanted to go back to the family and the community that I had down in Georgia. But I think that began to work on me. But one of the big things that happened really was that when I went off to grad school to get my master's and PhD, I decided to go into historical theology and church history. So, and we all know what Newman said about that. To be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant.
Yeah.
So, especially when I began studying the church fathers, I began to realize, oh my gosh, these guys are Catholics. They believe what Catholics believe. They, believe in bishops and the Eucharist and all kinds of things. And they learned from the apostles, from those who learned from the apostles. Because they've gotten it wrong so quickly. So that was really what began to move in that direction. I took a course in Catholic mystics from the Aquinas Center of Theology at Emory. Emory was supposed to be a Methodist school anyway, but they have a Catholic center there. And then, just my mind began to be converted by what I was reading.
Yeah. Now, were you familiar with the early church fathers before you started studying that track?
I knew in general early church history because my bachelor's degree at Yale, it was in religious studies general, but I purposely chose a lot of church history courses because I just loved history. So I'd had a general history in the early general course in the early history and medieval Christianity and that kind of thing. So I knew the names and maybe some references, but it wasn't until I was in grad school that I actually picked up the Confessions, by St. Augustine and other books that he had written. And it wasn't until then that I read parts of the Summa and began to read Catherine Sieno's dialogues and Teresa of Avila's, autobiography and other things like that. So it really brought me to a certain depth of an immersion, you might say, in Catholic thought. Yeah.
So do you remember anything that was really pivotal about because obviously, you didn't, as a Pentecostal, you wouldn't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist, but then you're seeing these early church fathers who seem to have a very real, substantial understanding of it. Was that one of those things, or?
What's interesting is that I wrote a paper that I presented at the American Academy of Religion in San Francisco some years ago about how I believe that the Pentecostals have a sacramental religious imagination, though they don't realize it usually. There are certain things about the kind of Pentecostal view of the world and of God and how he relates to the world that is very embodied. And so, one example would be one of the things I began to discover even before I went to grad school, looking at church history, was that, at least in the earlier days, when I was younger, the way the Pentecostal movement had become separate denominations was that the traditional so-called mainline Protestant denominations kicked them out. They said, no, there are no miracles anymore. There's no healing. There's no, they didn't do exorcism, any of that. But the Pentecostals said, look, it's here in the scripture. And so they would practice, pray for miracles. They would speak in tongues. They would, lay hands on for healing. Body postures was very important to them in worship, the way the hands were done. they began to develop notions of embodied authority, that God could actually share his authority with men that he had chosen, and ordained in so many ways, deliverance, exorcism, all those things. And I began to say, oh my gosh, here I am, a Pentecostal, and in the historical arguments over whether miracles and all these other things are still practiced, the mainline Protestants are on one side of the argument. This has changed now, but back then, and the Catholics and the Pentecostals are together on the other side of the argument. Isn't this interesting?
Wow. Yeah.
I'm thinking like a Catholic, or Catholics are thinking like Pentecostals or something. And and began to, so that, opened up a lot of doors for me, made it easier for me to accept the Eucharist.
So they're just missing that historical continuity, of the historic church, but in a sense they were kind of already practicing, the things of the church.
In many ways. I mean, they anoint with oil, okay? In the old days, at least when I was young, Presbyterians didn't do that. Baptists, if you tried to do it, you get thrown out of the church. Yeah. The speaking in tongues, there were Catholic saints who spoke in tongues, the laying on hands for healing. The Catholic tradition, the difference is, in the Pentecostal tradition, there's the expectation that anybody can and will do it if they, try by God's power. Whereas the Catholic tradition would say, well, God doesn't always give all those gifts to everybody. But if you look in the lives of the saints, you'll see that they are still alive and well. Those things did not pass away. And I began to read St. Augustine, found out, in his retractations toward the end of his life, he publishes a book of things that he had changed his mind on and his belief. And one of the things he mentions is that there was a time, his earlier writings, where he thought that the miracles had ceased for the apostles. But then he had some experiences, there you go again, when they brought the relics of St. Stephen into the city where he was, and he saw and others witnessed remarkable physical healings, miracles. And there were so many that they had to start recording them. And he says, it still happens.
Wow.
So Augustine was pivotal for me. I read his essay against the Donatists, who are almost like, ancient Protestants in a certain way, Puritans. They felt that the Catholic Church was still not as pure as it should be. During the persecutions, there were some who had apostatized rather than be put to death, persecuted, including some priests. And the church afterward, the Catholic Church, when they came back and sought, to be forgiven and to be restored, the church restored them, even the priest. And the folks, the Donatists, were the ones who rebelled against that and said, no, you can't. You can't. They're kind of marred for life. They're, tainted. We can't do that. And then his essay against that group, St. Augustine, was talking about all the reasons why it's a sin against charity not to forgive them, bring them back in, and to consider yourself purer than all the rest of the church, and to think it's more important, that purity, than than keeping unified. And by the time I finished reading it, I know we got to go. Just say, I said, oh my goodness, I am a Donatist. He's speaking to me.
Well, yeah. Boy, I wish we had another hour. Thank you so much, Dr. Thigpen, for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Oh, such a pleasure, Gary. God bless you.
Thank you. You too. Oh, man, it's already time to shut down the Midwest Command Center here. Thank you so much for listening. Coming up next, the dynamic duo of Catholic Talk Radio, the Terry and Jesse Show. And it's time for me to turn off the lights here at the dojo and shut down the Midwest Command Center. I hope everybody has a blessed day. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.